Hello, we are doing part 1 of chapter 8, which talks about political parties. You can see here a couple definitions, or a definition rather, of what a political party is. Cyan. Might be hard to see. Pen color. Magenta. Ooh, okay. Organization that sponsors candidates for political office under the organization's name. A political party's goal is to get their candidates elected to office. It's different from an interest group. Sometimes they have the same goals as interest groups, or rather they say they have the same goals as interest groups, but ultimately their main purpose is to get their members elected to office. And then when we say nomination, what we're referring to is designating or picking an official and saying, this is our candidate, this is who it is that we're trying to get elected. And I can't find my stopwatch. I guess I'll try to go by the clock. Wish me luck. Oops, too many. Party functions include nominating candidates, so picking candidates that I think would be good for office. Structuring the voting choice, meaning, they're sort of limiting the choices or narrowing it down to some of the main candidates. You don't see two Republicans running against each other in a general election. That would only be in a primary election, and so they structured that means that there is a primary election and that there is a general election. That's something that the political parties create. They propose alternative government programs, so there's always sort of this role of the loyal opposition, meaning whatever the current administration or the current majority party is doing, you can count on the minority party to say this is what they would do differently. So there's always going to be critique, and then they can coordinate the action of government officials, sort of bureaucrats and whatnot, and sort of give them priorities and goals for what types of things they should be working on. There were not parties discussed in the Constitution. In the Federalist Papers, they talk about the concern over parties, or they talk about factions, and the concern that could have a negative impact on the government. And they grew during Washington's presidency. These factions did, and eventually became political parties. You can see here a little bit of history of the political party system. It's sort of grouped into three sections. The first section being the Federalists and Democratic Republicans. This is going to be boring for you. Parties, you can see sort of an outline here. It's not something that shows up on tons of tests, so I'm going to kind of go through it relatively quickly. Mr. Owen walked in, and he just walked back out. I don't think he wants to hear my lecture. Second party system, you can see, going back to the slide before, eventually the Federalist Party goes away, the Democratic Republicans split. Eventually we see the creation of the Whig Party, and the Democratic Party, and then there's a couple elections that go by with that system, and then eventually the Republican Party is created in opposition to slavery, and that sort of leads us to having the Democratic. They replace the Whig Party, the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party, which is sort of what we have today. And then here's this idea of critical elections that we've talked about in class. So that there's a sharp change in party loyalty, a sharp change among voters for what their patterns are, what happens. So after a critical election, you see that all of a sudden there's a huge change in what people are doing and how they're voting. We've had a two-party system pretty solidly, certainly since the Civil War. There are third parties, but they have almost no chance of winning. Sometimes third-party candidates can be more successful at a local level, or sometimes at the state level, or even an independent candidate. Not to say that they never would win at a federal level. It's just very, very rare. And then you can see regionally they tend to favor one party over another, and we see that certainly at the state level. There are certain states that lean more Republican or more Democrat. There's sort of this history of the two main parties that we have today, balanced for a while, and then a Republican majority for a while, and then a Democratic majority for a while, and then janda is arguing that there's a balance today. That's fine. And then electoral de-alignment is now we're going through this process where there's less importance. Although you might make I'm still going to stick with it that it's less important party loyalty in voting decisions. People are more willing to vote sort of based on the person or the principle, and they're less likely to vote just because they always vote that way. Not to say that people don't do that, but it was more prominent. It used to be more prominent. Everyone in your neighborhood, they all voted Democrat. That's just how your neighborhood was, and it was sort of part of your identity. It wasn't necessarily what the principles of the party were. It was just sort of your almost a blind loyalty, for lack of a better term. You can see here, this is also, I think this is also in your book, and it's easier to see, but this sort of breaks it down. So here's that first part that we talked about, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and then you can see Democratic Party and the Whigs here, and then here is the, starting in 1956, sort of the system that we have today, where we get the two main parties. And then you can see here, there's every once in a while, there's the Populist Party, Progressive Party, States' Rights Party, American Independent, and then the Independent Reform Party, good old Ross Perot, if you remember that guy, the Green Party. So they kind of come and go whether or not they're running a candidate for president and things like that. Oh, that's got to be shorter than 10 minutes. Well, end part 1.